Over the next few presentations, we're going to look at the order primates. It's one of the mammalian orders, as you know, in which we belong, and it's interesting to look at the variety of species and genera that exist within this order. There are probably somewhere between around 250 different species and about 72 different genera that are included in primates. About a third of those primates, especially the great apes, like gorillas, chimps, for example, in Africa, and the orangutan in Southeast Asia, and many of the monkeys in Southeast Asia are under threat of extinction. They are endangered species. And I feel it's very important for us to put as much conservation effort as we can into preserving primates. So they range from little things that weigh probably 30 grams or an ounce, like a little mouse lemur that would fit into your hand, to a gorilla, a male gorilla that would weigh 440 pounds, 200 kilos. So there's a huge range in size in living primates. Here you're looking at a tarsier in the upper left-hand corner, a little cute little thing that eats things like frogs and lizards and jumps from tree to tree, to New World monkeys like the organ grinders monkey, the spider monkey, and so on, to lemurs that live only on Madagascar, to baboons that live in Africa, to orangs that live in Sumatra and in Borneo, and as you see at the end, gibbons. Now, Linnaeus, we've heard of him before, so here he is again. And here you see him all dressed up in the garb of a Laplander, actually. He was a Swede, as you know. And he proposed way back in his Systema Naturae, making a systematic arrangement of the natural world, the term primates, which means the lords of the animal world. He put us right at the top. And in Latin, primates or primates, as it is sometimes said, means of the first rank, and there you see a page out of his book, and he gives it no real definition. He says, know thyself. It's very interesting. Well, just looking at a cladogram of primates here, you have lemurs and lorises over here, which are grouped together. They're called prosimians. And then you have the anthropoids over here. Anthropoids. So there are two major groupings of primates, and we will look at them that way, with the tarsier in the middle, which is sometimes classified on its own. Now, way back in the 19th century, St. George Mivart, an Englishman, divided primates into these two major groups. And we talked about how nomenclature and naming things allows us to talk about things and communicate in a much more facile way than dealing with specific species. We can talk about groups. So prosimians are things like lemurs and lorises, and I put in tarsiers here. And anthropoids are monkeys, apes, and humans. It's very simple dichotomy. Now, many of the other orders in mammals, like if I've mentioned this before, but let's revisit it. If I say that's a carnivore, that belongs in the class Carnivora. We know that carnivore comes from the Latin meaning meat, and carnivores are meat eating. So a lion, a leopard, a dog, a cat, they're all carnivores, and they're all characterized by one single feature, which is relatively easy to remember. Now, Legros-Clark was an outstanding anatomist, an English anatomist in the 20th century, who said that the problem with primates is that you have to look at them in terms of trends and trajectories. And he was one who proposed that tree shrews were at the base of this cladogram on the left. Lemurs were a little bit more complex, tarsiers a little more complex, monkeys more complex, apes astonishingly complex, and us the most complex of all. So he saw trends in intelligence, trends in complex societies, trends in the loss of olfaction and replacing it with binocular vision, trends in terms of increase in brain size. And he thought that it was best not to single out. He couldn't find a single adaptation that characterized all primates and looked at them as typified by these trends. And we'll look at some of those specific aspects that he talked about. At the end of the dinosaur era, we've mentioned several times, there was a radiation that particularly began to take off in the later part of the Eocene and has diversified into many, many different species and genera, probably thousands of species that have gone extinct. And today, as I said, we have around 250 species. Humans are, of course, a primate, and we occupy every corner of the globe. There isn't any place where humans don't live, okay? And we do that not so much because of our adaptations, but because of culture. And with culture, we can live no matter how cold it is, or no matter how hot it is, or how difficult it is to get natural resources, we can get them. But this is the distribution of non-human primates. And what you see is they're essentially tropical and subtropical. But they're essentially near the equator, and they are a tropical group or a tropical order of mammals. So what are some of these characterizations or adaptations that Legros-Clark talked about? There is a tendency to retain 5 digits, pentadactyly on hands and feet. There's a tendency to replace claws with nails, with large tactile surfaces on the other side, which are useful in arboreal adaptations. They call them friction pads. We have very flexible, mobile, grasping digits. We tend to be upright, or orthograde as it's called. We have a clavicle that many other mammals don't have. And we have a tail, except when you get to things like apes and humans. And you can see a diversity of feet and hands on the left, and you can see the grasping abilities of most of those. In terms of sensory adaptations, we depend largely as primates on vision. We have a large visual cortex in the back of the skull. We tend to see in color, primates, monkeys, apes, lemurs, humans, and so on. And we have binocular vision. We see the world in 3 dimensions. Our eyes have overlapping visual fields. We don't have eyes that look out in 2 different directions. We look forward, there's an overlap, and hence we have binocular vision. There is a complete bony enclosure for the eyeball for protection. There is a reduction in olfaction. If you look at the dog, for example, your family dog, it has a very long snout on it. It has a very large area in its brain that's dedicated to olfaction. It smells the world a lot. We don't have as developed olfactory areas in the brain or in physical structures. And there are also differences in the internal ear, which is completely enclosed in bone. You can see, looking at a gorilla on the left, a male and a female, that the orbit is completely closed, and there is on the side of it a post-orbital bar that we talked about earlier. Now, dentally, our teeth are very generalized. They're not highly specialized. If you open up the mouth of a carnivore, you'll see that there are slicing teeth in there. There is a loss of many of the teeth, and other teeth are specifically changed into like scissors for cutting up meat. There is no fusion along the midline of a dog's mandible, for example. Allows it to line up the cutting teeth so that they can slice through. Our teeth tend to be more generalized and not specialized. They tend to be heterodont, which means that you have slicing incisors, you have piercing canines, and you have crushing and grinding cheek teeth, or molars and premolars. And we have very typical dental formulas. And the dental formula of an ape on the left, chimpanzee in this case, or a human on the right, is simply you take 1/2 of the mouth, and you have 2 incisors, right here. You have one canine right here. You have two premolars, those, and three molars there, and the same thing in the bottom of our mouths. And primates can be characterized using these dental formulas. What are the dental characteristics? We have a generalized pattern, I said. It's related to a general trend to omnivory, not being specialized in a specific diet. Some are very specialized. They're the exceptions. Teeth have different shapes, as I said. They're heterodont, as I mentioned. We have, within primates, 30 to 36 teeth in our mouths. And some of these dental specializations, one in particular, is down here, and it's called a tooth comb, and you find it in lemurs. The lower incisors are tilted forward into like a little shovel that they use for grooming themselves. They'll groom their bodies with that. They have a generalized dentition that allows them to eat all kinds of food, from leaves to fruits to seeds to insects, and some of them have, as I said, very specialized diets. In terms of locomotion, looking at primates, a lot of primates hang, like the lemur you see on the left. Some of them are arboreal quadrupeds that walk on tops of branches. Others are vertical clingers and leapers, like our friend the tarsier. And when you see them, they really do. They leap from tree to tree like that, and they grasp, and then they push off with their feet, and they grasp the next one. And that's called vertical clinging and leaping. And terrestrial quadrupedalism is typical of monkeys. And that's where they walk on their palms of their hands, and usually at this joint right here, where the fingers articulate with the back of the hand, okay, they can bend at 90 degrees. We can't do that. That would be very, very painful. But chimps and gorillas have an interesting mode of locomotion, which is called knuckle walking. And you see this gorilla doing that. And what they do is they walk on these knuckles like that on the ground, on their hands. And that, as a special adaptation to their terrestrial mode of knuckle walking quadrupedalism, there's a little ridge of bone here that prevents collapse. There are a whole bunch of muscles in here called flexors that prepare the hand and help stabilize the wrist. So there's variation in many of these things: locomotion, diet, teeth, etc., etc. And we'll see much more in the next presentation.